I'm Glenn Powell, welcoming you to the Texas Tribune Festival. Every year, this weekend is about big ideas about the future of our state and our country. In case this is your first rodeo, you're going to hear things and meet people you don't agree with. And that's the point. At TribFest, the rules are we listen to each other. We treat each other with respect despite our differences, so be kind, be courteous, and most of all, be civil. And if you can't be civil, well, I happen to know a hitman.
Thank you.
Wow. So that was, for those of you who didn't see, pretty much everyone was standing. Most people were standing. This is typically what Liz Cheney gets in liberal college towns now, right?
It is a new day.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. I'm Mark Leibovich. I'm a reporter for The Atlantic, and you all know Liz Cheney. Thank you all for being here. I saw the lines like for blocks outside, so apologies to anyone who can't hear me now who didn't get in. But it is indicative of how resonant Liz's message has been over the last few years, and thanks for being here, Liz.
Well, it's wonderful to be here again at the Texas Tribune and here in Austin, and of course with you, Mark. So, and thank you for that wonderful welcome. Great to be here.
All right. Well, we have a million questions. We are going to actually. I have a little thing to. I have instructions. If you have questions for our speaker, please submit them to TexasTribune.org/ask. And I guess that'll all be curated, and when we come to the end, we will take audience questions. So Liz made a bit of news this week. For those of you who missed it, Liz said that she would be voting for Kamala Harris ticket. And my immediate question is, you couldn't have waited 2 days and given us this story? So, this might be about saving democracy, but really it's about petty, parochial, journalistic, competitive things. I guess I would ask you first, what's the response been?
Well, apologies to you, Mark. But, I felt that it was a particularly important discussion to have for the first time in North Carolina, where, one of the questions that I hear from Republicans who know that they would not support Donald Trump again, but have sort of said, well, maybe I'll just write someone in. And I think that particularly when we're talking about states where we know it's going to be close, where the election will be decided, we don't have that luxury. And I think it's really important to recognize the nature of the choice that we have. And I was telling Mark before that I've heard from a number of friends and longtime Republicans who have said to me, okay, like we knew we weren't going to vote for Trump, but let's take another look at Vice President Harris. And have said, we're listening. We hear what you're saying about how important it is, not to throw a vote away here, but to make sure that we leave no question at all about the stakes and about how important it is for Vice President Harris to prevail.
So take us through your timing on this. I mean, presumably you had made this decision in your head a while ago, right? I mean, why did you decide to come out with this now?
Well, I think, first of all, obviously, Vice President Harris has just become the nominee,
Right.
just came through both parties' conventions, and I have felt that it's very important that this decision not be viewed as, or because it isn't, a political decision.
Right.
That it's a decision that I wanted to be able to talk about and that I reflected on, that's very much based upon my view of what our duty is. And obviously, I have and have had serious policy disagreements on a whole range of issues. Not on every issue, certainly, and,
Right.
and we can talk about that. But my view very much is that those of us who believe in the defense of our democracy, in the defense of our Constitution, in the survival of our republic, have a duty in this election cycle to come together to put those things above politics.
Right.
And I look forward to the days when we will again be having, debates about tax policy
Right.
and national security policy and everything else, because that will mean that we have made it through what is right now a very grave threat to the functioning of the republic.
Yeah, the internet has helpfully provided video of every bad thing you've ever said about Kamala Harris over the next 48 hours. So in case, it's all out there if everyone wants to go. Tell me, was there any talk of you speaking at the Democratic convention? I mean, Adam Kinzinger, your former colleague, did. A number of Republicans did. Was that in play at all?
My view was that I first of all, I applaud those who did, and I think that it's very important, and it was very important for the whole country to see on that stage, that platform, the broad range of policy perspectives and the broad range of leaders from across the country who have made the decision to put the country ahead of party. Right. So for me, I wanted to make the announcement to do it in a way that wasn't connected to the party politics of the moment. I also happened to be in London at the Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah. Certain things are more important than democracy, especially when you have daughters. I know this because my entire family is going to Toronto to see Taylor next month, or November.
If you have the chance to go
I do
see
not
Taylor,
have the chance because they only got 4 tickets and I'm the 5th.
It was.
I hear it's great.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
Because people were tracking her plane, and there was a lot of speculation about the surprise guest on the last night of the convention, and Leon Panetta turned out a fine American, but not quite Taylor Swift. All right. So what do you see your role going forward in the campaign, if anything? I mean, have you thought this through at all? Have you coordinated at all with the campaign? Or?
Well, I will be, and I had always planned to be, and I will continue to be doing everything I can over the course of the next 2 months here. To make sure that people realize, understand, recognize who Donald Trump is and what he did and why he's so dangerous. I'm not a campaign surrogate. I'm not, officially, I'm not, technically out there as a surrogate, but absolutely going to be in many key battleground states. Very much focused on how important it is that we defeat him in this cycle.
Okay. I mean, you've already done some really big events like this. There was one in Des Moines. There have been all over. So I assume we'll be seeing more things like that, where the larger choice, but also democracy will be the main topic of discussion. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also am going to be talking about how important it is that we elect responsible and serious people up and down the ballot. I mean, defeating Donald Trump is critically important, but you know there are numbers of candidates around the country who have embraced election denialism, and I think it's really important that we defeat them too. And I think that one of the most important things we need to do as a country as we begin to rebuild our politics is we need to elect serious people. And you know, often when you go in to vote, you don't have the choice. You know, there aren't enough good candidates running. I want to say specifically, though, here in Texas, you guys do have a tremendous, serious candidate running for the United States Senate, and his name is...
You're stepping on the news, guys. Let her speak. Let her speak. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not Ted Cruz. But Colin Allred is somebody I served with in the House, and somebody who really, when you think about the kind of leaders our country needs, and going to this point about, you know, you might not agree on every policy position, but we need people who are going to serve in good faith. We need people who are honorable public servants, and in this race, that is Colin Allred. So I'll be working on his behalf.
So we have officially made some news here. Let's get greedy. Dick Cheney, your father, a beloved figure among Democrats for many, many years. Do you, if you know who he will be supporting or who he'll be voting for, do you care to share with us who he might be voting for?
Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris.
Okay. Wow. Words I never expected to hear.
Yeah. You know, if you think about the moment that we're in, and you think about how serious this moment is, you know, my dad believes, and he's said publicly, that there's never been an individual in our country who is as grave a threat to our democracy as Donald Trump is, and that's the moment that we're facing. And so I think recognizing that, and let me also say, you know, obviously Vice President Harris and I have had and have policy disagreements on some issues, but I have been really impressed watching, for example, the Democratic Convention, listening to her speech at that convention, learning about her life story, learning about, you know, the story of her success and the extent to which it's an American story. And I think we all have to walk ourselves back from this abyss that we've looked over in our politics, and work together to build a better future for this country.
Tell me, how much of the Democratic Convention did you watch? What were some of the other speeches or impressions that you watched, or speeches you watched or impressions you might have gotten from them?
Yeah, I didn't watch every moment of it. I watched more of it than I care to admit. I mean, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a nerd that way.
Yeah.
But I think that watching the extent to which the party made clear its embrace of love of this country, and you know, contrasting that love of this country, the willingness to recognize how important American leadership is in the world, contrasting that with where the Republican Party has gone. I mean, it seems on many days that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are doing everything they can to drive Reagan Republicans away. Right. And they certainly do not reflect the importance of that Reagan philosophy of peace through strength and a strong national defense. And even beyond that, you may have seen Tucker Carlson's embrace of pro-Nazi propaganda on Monday. Interviewing an historian who said that Churchill was the historian, I put in quotation marks, who said that Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. And he said that, quote, Hitler didn't want to fight. And just disgusting garbage that Tucker Carlson embraced, platformed, and I've seen news reports now that yesterday J.D. Vance sat down and did an interview with Tucker Carlson. Now, if you appear with Tucker Carlson, if you do an interview with him, as J.D. Vance apparently has, you're endorsing him. You're embracing that. And that pro-Nazi propaganda should have no place. It is garbage, and it should have no place in our politics.
Yeah. So is this, so 2020, there were no real conventions, I mean, they were virtual. Is this the first Republican convention you haven't attended since when? Like, I assume you've been to every one, right? I've
been to most of them. The first one that I attended was, I think it was 1984.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. I was actually a page at that convention. So I was one of the people, we came in every night as the convention session opened carrying American flags. And I've been to, I don't think I was at 2016, but I've been to the other ones.
What, did you watch this year's Republican convention at all, being a nerd? Seriously, that was quite a spectacle also.
No, I did. And look, I think there's just, at the end of the day, the idea that, people, it isn't just that the party is trying to kind of whitewash what Donald Trump did. The party is embracing it. And I think one of the things that's also really important for people to remember is, January 6th would have been a far worse constitutional crisis if Mike Pence had done what Donald Trump was pressuring him to do, illegally, unconstitutionally throw out votes. Right. And J.D. Vance has said clearly and directly that he would have done that. So, I think every Republican, anybody who's contemplating casting a vote for that ticket, really needs to think about what they are enabling, what they're embracing, and the danger of electing people who will only honor election results if they agree with the outcome, and who are willing to set aside the Constitution, and in the case of Donald Trump, promote, provoke, exploit violence in order to seize power.
We have been talking and watching just this dereliction, frankly, of Republicans who know better for a number of years now. The convention was really next level. Granted, the assassination attempt had taken place a couple of days before the start, so that cast a very strange energy over everything, and obviously it was a horrific event. And but there was there was just a lot of, and there was also a lot of overconfidence too at that moment because Biden hadn't gotten out yet. So it was a strange moment. I mean, I guess you mentioned Mike Pence. How should we think about him at this point? I mean, he obviously did the right thing on January 6, 2021. He has said, unlike many other Republicans, that he would not vote for Donald Trump. He hasn't gone as far as what you have done. What's the right way to think about a guy like him?
Well, look, I think that every American owes Mike Pence just a tremendous debt of gratitude. I don't think you can overstate you know, the courage of what he did, and look, we knew it on that day. You know, at midnight, after the House and Senate had come back into session on January 6th, I happened to be in Statuary Hall, and the Vice President was coming through, and I had the chance that night to thank him for what he had done, and I think this is a place too where we really need to make sure that we understand the details and the specifics, not only of what Donald Trump was doing to attempt to seize power in the lead up to January 6th, but very specifically what he was doing for 187 minutes while the violence was underway. And, you know, that includes watching the assault take place on television, watching this mob that he had sent, that he knew was armed, watching them attack and beat police officers. I think Donald Trump today is appearing at the Fraternal Order of Police, and he will try to convince them that he is pro-law enforcement. And everybody ought to watch the disgusting assault on law enforcement by people that he sent to the Capitol, that he watched. He knew it was happening. He watched it happen, and instead of telling people to go home, he sent out a tweet saying that Mike Pence was a coward, essentially, didn't have the courage to do what needed to be done, which we know further inflamed the mob, and which he knew would further inflame the mob. And, you know, just think about from a human perspective, he sat in the dining room next to the Oval Office while his family members were pleading with him to tell the mob to go home, while his senior staff was pleading with him to tell the mob to go home. They told him, they gave him a note that said a civilian had been shot at the door to the House chamber, and he still wouldn't tell the mob to go home. And the idea that you have the President of the United States, whose fundamental constitutional duty is to defend this nation, to ensure that our laws are faithfully executed, that he would watch an assault that he had instigated. He would watch this take place on television. He would ignore the pleas of people to tell the mob to leave, and he would do that for over 3 hours. Like, I don't care what your policy perspective is. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. You cannot look at that behavior and come to any conclusion other than that is depravity. That is depravity. And you cannot give somebody like that power ever again.
Yeah. So what was it like, what were your impressions this summer as you watched the drama in the Democratic Party play out? I mean, say, beginning with a debate and ending with, I mean, Biden's decision to step down. I mean, you know, we were all kind of riveted by that drama. I mean, it was kind of depressing, but what was it like for you?
Look, I think that the country, as history looks back at this time, it will be clear that the country owes a huge debt of gratitude also to President Biden.
For stepping aside.
Well, for defeating Donald Trump, right. And for defending our democracy, and then for, again, you know, putting the country ahead of his own political gain. I mean, it's a very rare thing for a politician, for a leader to be willing to say, I'm going to give up this tremendous power because I think it's right for the country, and he did that. Well, I think it's really.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. We can throw it open. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
To sum up, thank you, Liz. So
That was on camera that you said that, right? No.
did I? I was just to reflect that I was echoing the crowd. I was summarizing helplessly. Okay, so we still have a very close race here. So let's be current here. If you were, I mean, this is hypothetical, but you're not an elected official anymore, so I can ask you hypothetical questions. If you were advising Kamala Harris going into this debate on, I guess, Monday or Tuesday, with Donald Trump, he's not a fun or easy guy to debate, obviously. How do you think she should proceed?
Yeah. Look, I think that, every opportunity that Donald Trump gets to show the American people who he is, he pretty clearly, and look, his running mate is doing this too. I mean, this is my diplomatic way of saying it. They're misogynistic pigs. Mm-hmm. And I think that will become clear. I mean, I think that the Vice President Harris has demonstrated, particularly if you watch the speech we were talking about at the convention, right. A focus on seriousness and substance and policy, I think that for people who sort of say, well, I'm gonna. If you have conservatives who might say, well, I'm thinking of voting for Trump because he's a conservative. Mm-hmm. He is not a conservative. And when you look at the contrast in terms of policies, for example, when it comes to things like NATO, when it comes to things like the support of Ukraine, when you look at the proposals that he's made to impose massive tariffs, for example, I think that there are a whole range of policy issues that raise very serious concerns. But we would. Sometimes you hear from Trump supporters that they want to just let Trump be Trump, and I endorse that. Let that guy go, because the more people see him, and the more frankly, at the end of the day, I think that women around this country, we've had enough. We've had enough. And I think what that means is that people have got to step up and realize, I mean, again, look at what J.D. Vance says on an almost daily basis about women. I mean, that guy's got a real women problem. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to psychoanalyze him. And there's a lot of eyeliner jokes to be made in there. But I think that, at the end of the day, if you listen to what he says about women, and you look at Donald Trump and what Donald Trump has done and what he says about women, these are not people that we can entrust with power again. But that means women and men. But we've got to get out there and vote. We got to make sure people are registered. You got to drive people to the polls. It really, really matters this time.
Right. See, I mean, what you're saying is, I mean, you're going beyond protecting democracy here. I mean, this is a very different thematic lane than I have heard. I mean, I've heard you say similar things before, but I guess if you are a woman debating Donald Trump, and he might be a misogynistic pig, but how there are perils as a woman on that stage, as Hillary Clinton learned, and as she learned given the results of that election. I mean, are there certain things she should avoid doing? I mean, obviously, she'll do what she does.
What we've seen is that the thing that Donald Trump really doesn't know how to handle is a strong, competent, serious woman. He really, it throws him. And so I think that you know, I think the vice president will do just fine. And I think, as I said, you know, the American people will have a chance, not just at that debate, but throughout this campaign to see who he is. And we know what he has done. And I think that, you know, it's not a difficult choice.
I want to ask you this: is Trump in any trouble from the right? I mean, we know I agree that he's not a conservative, especially on things like Ukraine, things like tariffs, things like, you know, deficit reduction, things like that. But I mean, he's been wobbly all over the place on, you know, say abortion the last, you know, few weeks in particular. I mean, are you sensing at all that people who have been a very reliable part of his base, I mean, over the last few years, I mean, not people who didn't jump off in 2016 might be ready to stay home? Because there have been some rumblings out of people like Pence, people from the evangelical right who have said, I mean, enough already.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you're starting to see that. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, what he demonstrated was, you know, fundamentally a willingness to conduct himself in a way that violated what I think is the most conservative of all conservative principles, which is fidelity to the Constitution. And so, yes, I mean, I think when, you know, some of my friends who, for example, are national security hawks, you know, we've never before, since the existence of NATO, had a president of the United States of either party who has invited Russia to invade our NATO allies. And I think that, you know, though people really do need to stop and focus on what he's saying and what he represents, you know, but at the end of the day, the biggest reason why he can't be president again is the danger that he poses to the republic.
Back to current events. What did you make of the DOJ charges against just the Russian media influencer connection that we've seen sort of laid out in the last few days?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's very serious. It's very important. It's, you know, something that is not a surprise. We know that the Russian government has been involved in and has, you know, we've had indictments previously involved in attempting to influence the outcome of our elections. I think that you know, in this particular instance, the fact that there were, it looks like, significant payments being made. Now, the individuals who apparently were receiving the payments have said they didn't know that they were coming from the Russians. I mean, it was just like magic, apparently. But I, you know, I think it's important to take it seriously and important to realize that there are adversaries who are doing everything they can to try to sow chaos and division. But it also points to, you know, another really troubling development inside the Republican Party, which is how many elected Republicans are pro-Putin. And you know, it's not a majority, but people willing to espouse sort of Putin's view of the world, and I put J.D. Vance for sure in this category. And I think we again, you know, these things matter. We need to make sure that we understand and recognize the effort that's underway here to influence this election in a way that results in the outcome that the Russians and other adversaries would prefer.
Did you overlap in Congress with Tim Walz?
I don't. I mean, maybe briefly.
Okay.
I don't
You
know
don't know
that
him, or you
we
didn't
work
work
together.
with him or anything. What do you think of how he's been since he was named?
I think that the extent to which he's been effective out there on the campaign trail has been impressive. I disagreed with the answer that he gave yesterday. I believe it was yesterday when he was asked about October 7th, and I do think that it's very important for us to recognize the extent to which talking about October 7th without mentioning Hamas by name is not an accurate reflection of the challenges that we face and of the attack and the assault on Israel.
Okay. Have you talked to Kamala Harris since, well, ever, but also, especially this week?
Ever, yes. This week, no.
This week, no. Okay. Would you serve in a Harris-Walz administration, if asked?
Not
going to make news on that today?
We made a lot of news today, Mark. No,
Yeah.
look, I am not focused on that. I am very much focused on we have to make sure that we defeat Donald Trump in November.
But while we are trying to sort of amass a ledger of news made today, you are endorsing Tim Walz for vice president. Is that correct? Oh, right. I mean, got to keep score here. Before we get to questions, I have a few scenarios I want to lay out, and I'd like to get your thoughts on. So it's November 5th. That's the election, right? November 5th? You guys should know this. When is the election? Okay. Okay, so a couple of scenarios. Say Donald Trump, after, say, 72 hours after the polls close, it's clear that he has won the presidency. And it could happen. I mean, the polls are very close.
But it's not going to happen.
What?
And I know what you're going to ask.
Okay.
But
It could happen. I mean, and you know this.
Well, that's why we have to work so hard to make sure that it doesn't happen.
I want to ask you, I guess hypothetically, what goes through your mind, though? Because, I mean, obviously the country is not going to stop if that takes place. I mean, what is the correct and responsible, and what are things that people should be concerned about if that were to come to pass? And then I'll ask you other scenarios.
Well, I mean, I think he's not going to win because we're going to make sure that people are mobilized and they get out to vote. I think that part of making sure that people are mobilized is talking about what a second Trump term would look like. And again, this is a place where I have Republican friends who will say, well, our institutions will protect us. We don't have to worry. And that's not true. And I think if you just sort of walk through what we would see in a second Trump term, and he has said much of this, we know that there were people who served in the first Trump administration who prevented him from doing the worst that he wanted to do in a number of instances. And we know that those are the people Donald Trump does not want serving in a second Trump administration. He talks about putting people like Kash Patel, for example, in leadership positions, in the Defense Department or at the CIA. People like Mike Flynn, in December of 2020 on television said that Donald Trump should deploy the military to seize voting machines in swing states and rerun the election. And so the people that he would have around him are not people that would be in any way trying to stop his worst inclinations. He said he won't abide by the rulings of the courts. We see right now that he's gone to war with the justice system. He's gone to war with the rule of law. And let me just say a point with respect to his trial for the January 6th related charges. He is working so hard to make sure that the testimony that occurred in front of the grand jury, testimony that he has seen, through discovery, he's got all of the testimony. Now, the select committee was able to present a lot of evidence, but the special counsel has secured even more. And Donald Trump is working every day to hide that from the American people. This effort to delay beyond the election, to prevent any disclosure of the testimony in front of the grand jury. And it's fundamentally important, in my view, that the American people see that testimony, that they understand, that they see what those who were working for Donald Trump said about his actions. Okay. And that gives you an insight into how he views the justice system. Our courts they don't have an enforcement mechanism. If the president is unwilling to enforce the rulings of the courts, then we're not a nation of laws. And that is something that you would see happen almost immediately, or immediately. Right. Of course, people say, well, maybe the Congress will stop him. But you name me a Republican member of Congress that you really think is going to step up and stop him. He will ignore the need to get his appointees confirmed. He'll appoint people in acting positions. So you can go down the list, again and again and again.
He'll
pardon power. He will. Anybody who says that they're concerned about carrying out something that he's asked that they do, he'll offer up pardons. He said he wants to completely eliminate major parts of the career civil service so that you only have people who support him in office. So, and again, I think the idea that he would leave office is a fantasy. Right. And so all of those things, I do think people really need to sit down and think through what would it mean to put this depraved human being in the most powerful office in the world, and why that's a risk we can't take.
So, okay, before I get to scenario 2, I want to plug, you mentioned Kash Patel. The Atlantic has a piece by my colleague Elena Plott, who's here. I don't know if she's here, but she's in Austin. It's tremendous. Everyone who doesn't know who Kash Patel is should read that. So that's my plug. Scenario 2, Kamala Harris wins by, say, 3-4 percentage points. The networks declare her the victor within a few days of Election Day. Trump does not concede, as he didn't last time. What goes through your mind when you're obviously encouraged by the result of the election, but we have this situation that obviously has echoes to 4 years ago? How should we think about that if that comes to pass? Yeah,
I think that first of all, it's one of the reasons why it's so important that margin of victory be as large as possible, because you already can hear Donald Trump talking about the fact that the election will be rigged if he doesn't win. So I think that's very important. I think that making sure that people are volunteering as poll watchers, that people are at the polls, that people are prepared for the fact that there will be efforts after the fact to try to steal the election if he loses. Now, I think on one hand, it will be a different situation than it was in 2020 because he's not in power.
Not in the White House, right.
And so that means that he doesn't have control of the levers of power in the way that he did. But
Mike Johnson might be. Or
right. I mean, I think again, it goes to this point about what can happen then on January 6th. Right. And you've already, I've seen Trump campaign officials say things like, well, the election doesn't really end until January 20th, until Inauguration Day, which that's wrong, that's unconstitutional. We've put some changes into place, which are good changes, through the Electoral Count Reform Act that we passed. You have to have a larger number of members of the House and Senate object in order to have a debate about electoral votes. In my view, there's no basis for any objection in Congress. Congress does not have the right to act as a sort of court of last resort. Once you have had governors of the states certify those election results, which they do far before January 6th ever happens. And this is another thing for people to remember here in Texas about Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz led the effort on the Senate side to attempt to throw out votes. And there's an audio recording of Ted Cruz talking to Maria Bartiromo. I believe it's on January 2nd, 2021, where he's explaining to her his concept for basically how Congress is going to be able to reject certified electoral votes. And Bartiromo says to him, "Do you really think you're going to be able to overturn this? Do you think you're going to be able to overturn this?" And according to reports of this discussion, this audio tape, Ted Cruz's response is, "I hope so." So to have someone who is, on January 2nd, it was clear you had certified electors from every one of the 50 states. There were no legitimate contested slates of electors. And he was saying that he hoped to be able to overturn the election. That is not somebody that you can put in a position to be able to do that again.
So, before we get to questions, I want scenario 3, which is a more hopeful scenario from where we started. Harris wins. Trump eventually, his appeals are exhausted and everyone's exhausted, and he goes away. Do you think that this could be the thing that changes the Republican Party or reverts it to some direction that is more familiar to the Liz Cheneys that came up in these ranks?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think that coming through this period of time, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, realizing how important it is for us to rethink how we conduct ourselves in politics is so important. And, I'm as guilty of partisan attacks, I have been, as anybody. And I think it's really matters. If you look at all of the challenges that we're facing as a nation, committing ourselves that we are going to have debates and discussions that are much more focused on substance, where we actually listen to each other. Trying again to sort of say, we're going to reject the toxicity. And I'm not naive about how difficult that might be, but I think that Democrats and Republicans both have a really important role to play in that. Everybody does. And, when you think about a Harris administration, because the coalition that has come together is a coalition across the political spectrum working to make sure that she is elected, the responsibility then that she will have, and that I believe that she knows she has, is to be a president for all Americans and to have policies that reflect the reality that all Americans face. And I think that's a hugely important step to take. And I think as someone who has been a Republican, who is a conservative, being part of getting back to a place where we have two parties in this country that are based on substance and policy, it's crucially important for the health of our democracy.
Okay, so there was a guy who was going to come out here with a phone. Here we go. There's the guy. Here, take it from here.
These are from the audience. The first one is, young conservatives have grown up thinking Donald Trump is the GOP. How do Republicans in their 20s show that not every conservative is like Trump?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and the way that young people have to do it is by speaking out, by being engaged, by educating yourselves about policy and thinking about why you're advocating for conservative policies. I think it's also really important for people to educate themselves about the history of our country, and to, we need to do a better job as adults at helping to educate our young people about fundamental civics concepts and how the Constitution's structured and why it matters, but also about what heroic people have done in this country, what our men and women in uniform do every day to defend us, and why it matters, and why America is exceptional, and why we're different. And I think if we need to make sure our young people are learning that in school, but if you're not learning it in school, I think reading history, getting hold of biographies, finding lessons that you can about leaders in the past, and understanding what it takes to defend the country is so important.
If Trump loses, what do you think the future of the national GOP looks like?
Looks a lot brighter.
Should Democrats be worried that their party's platform is a barrier to Republicans or former Republicans who no longer feel like the GOP is a place they can call home?
Look, I think that I think it's really important, in this cycle, and it's good for the country, for both parties to reject the fringes. And I think that it's not the same challenge, obviously. The sickness that pervades the Republican Party is unique. But I do think that the Democratic Party has a responsibility to be a welcoming home for people who understand that they can't be part of what the Republicans are doing, but they want to know that they can be part of something that is responsible and that truly does reflect the substance and policy, and not just sort of partisan politics.
What do you think Democrats are missing with rural voters that Republicans are not?
I think, and I look at this, from the perspective of Wyoming in particular. And Wyoming is different from Texas in this regard. In Wyoming, over 50% of the land in the state is owned by the federal government, and so policies that are made in Washington, D.C. have a huge impact on people who, every place, this isn't just in Wyoming, but if you're trying to graze cattle on federal land, if you're involved in the energy industry, there are a whole range of areas where people in Washington make decisions that can have really devastating consequences and repercussions. And the feeling of not being heard by Washington, the feeling that unelected individuals are making those decisions, that's a real and legitimate concern. And Donald Trump tapped into that in a way that, he's lying and he's betraying people, but he's effectively tapped into people feeling like they aren't heard. And I think listening to people who are trying every day to make a living and are finding that made impossible in some cases by the federal government, and changing policies to reflect that we understand and we hear you, and you know, we're not trying to, the federal government needs to be understood as, you know, something, in my view, that needs to be limited in its ability to have that impact on people's lives.
What message do you have for Texas voters who feel disencouraged by the state leadership's embrace of Trump?
Vote for Colin Allred.
How do you combat the fact that even if Donald Trump loses, his ideology and dangerous rhetoric is still there, and it's being pushed by many people still in the party?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and I think a big part of it is all of us as voters realizing how serious this endeavor is. And you know, if you are somebody operating on the fringes of the Republican Party, well, it's not the fringes anymore. If you are somebody who, you know, has been elected to Congress, and you know, you think that your job every day is to get as many likes as possible on social media, for example, and you say the craziest things you can imagine, those people get a lot of positive reinforcement. And too often, the serious people sort of say, my God, I don't want any part of this. And the voters also say, they just turn it off. And so what I would say is the only way we can change it is for the voters to understand, no, this really matters. You don't have the luxury of saying, I'm going to ignore politics. You don't have the luxury of saying, you know, I'm not going to vote in this election. We need people to also put their name on the ballot, to run for office, to understand that you cannot elect people that you wouldn't hire. Like, you can't make somebody, I mean, like, if you wouldn't trust someone, like, to babysit your kids, you probably shouldn't elect him president. It's like,
what can or should people be doing to combat efforts right now to cast doubts on this election?
I think speaking out against those efforts, if you know, for elected officials, and if you look at sort of the mechanics of our elections, and you listen to what, you know, the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, the entities in the federal government that are responsible for ensuring the security of the elections, you know, they will tell you that our election process and our election system is secure, and they're working on it around the clock to make sure that it stays that way. Elected officials need to recognize, and they need to speak out, and they need to say, you know, when individuals, Donald Trump and others, say, well, democracy doesn't work, our system's broken, you know, our country has dissolved into a situation where, you know, the democratic process is sick. Number one, those are lies, and number two, it's exactly what the Chinese Communist Party says about democracy. It's what our adversaries say about democracy. They're echoing the things that America's enemies say, and those of us who know it isn't true have a responsibility to stand against it. We also have an obligation, and this is a place where there's bipartisan support, to make sure we're doing things like protecting poll workers, that we are absolutely rejecting violence as any part of our political process. And we need to be clear in a bipartisan basis that that's the case.
And then last one, how many Republican elected officials have reached out to you to thank you since you made your announcement that you were supporting Harris?
I'm thinking of the definition of thank. I've heard from more than you would imagine. And, you know, look, we're in a partisan election season, but I do think, you know, as I said before, that in this cycle, Republicans really, you know, all Americans, but Republicans really do need to think about how am I going to vote that actually puts this country ahead of partisanship, and I think you will have more do that than you can imagine right now.
Right. Oh, he's gone. So this is great. We have 50 seconds left. It is, as a point of personal privilege, and I have the mic now, it is a total pleasure to interview Liz, to get to talk to her. She's one of the more compelling figures that we get to cover these days. Thank you for making B, C-list news with us. No, good news. They're good. And, you know, we'll be watching. It's obviously a huge fall.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you, and great to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Are you signing books or something? No, you're not.
I don't think so.
Her paperback is coming out.